Hey mages, welcome to today's video and Total MTG if it's your first time here. If you've been looking for a top meta standard deck but have been put off by some of the deck prices, then this is the video for you today. In today's video, I've got the top 5 cheapest MTG meta decks that you can play and buy in paper. All the card prices from the video are sourced from the channel sponsors Cardmarket. There is links for them down below in case you found it go and buy some of these decks for yourself, and it also helps the channel out as well. The 5 decks covered in the video are all competitive best of 3 versions with good win rates, fully complete with a sideboard in the total price of each deck. If you're new to Magic and don't know what a meta deck is, well, it's a deck that's selected by their strong win rates versus other decks and the probability of encountering them. So basically it's a very popular deck. When you look at the current standard meta, what really sticks out is how expensive some of the decks can be. You look at decks like Domain Ramp at an average price of around £532, which is about $676. Various Rakdos bills also around £450, that's about $577. Today's decks, while still being as competitive as those, are way cheaper and much friendlier on your wallet, which basically everyone just loves. Ranging from the most expensive of the 5 being less than half the price of those just mentioned decks, and to one just being over 50, just over £55, which is around $70. So without further ado, let's get on to looking at today's top 5 cheapest meta decks. I'm going to start with the most expensive deck for you, then work down to the absolute cheapest. Now coming in at £209.54 is Boros Convoke. First off, let's look at where the money is in this deck by looking at the 3 most expensive cards in the list. A card that takes up a massive chunk of this deck is Cavern of Souls, with 3 of them in the main board and a total cost of £84. I mean, Cavern is a great card that will really help against most kind of control decks in the meta. Stopping your creatures being countered is massive in a deck that revolves around creatures, well, resolving. The main one being the namesake of the deck, which is Knight Errant of Eos, for its Convoke ability. Getting the Knight Errant on the field is essential for going through your deck here, as you get to look at the top 6 cards of your library for 2 creatures with X mana or less for the amount of creatures it invoked. A very powerful ability, and of course can be played ahead of curve, meaning you can amass a board state and start swinging. But, and a big but, is Cavern of Souls worth the money for this deck? The answer is yes, but I personally think money can be saved by either cutting one down or even testing none at all before you go and splash the cash on these really good cards. Now, the card obviously can be used in multiple decks as well, so it wouldn't just be just for this deck, so it could be a very good purchase. Now, this is just my opinion, and of course, being a budget player myself as well, sometimes it's that's coming out of me thinking I could save a few pounds. Next up is a card from the sideboard. Now, sideboards are always subjective to what may be tuned against your meta at your local game store, but each of these decks has a sideboard that is the average across the board for them. When the announcement coming in around £12 seems expensive to me for a card that has been, seems to have been around standard forever, but it goes to show how popular and good the card really is. A 3 mana enchantment that can either make a token or draw you a card, and when the last counter is placed on it, flips into a creature pumping the anthem is pretty sweet. I'm kind of surprised it's not in the main board, but I think the new card, Case of the Gateway Express, that can help with removal and give a power bump too, is a really good replacement. I see these two really being flipped between matches that suit each other, and both are very good cards, even with a huge difference in price. I could see lands being a bit of a theme also with most expensive cards in the decks, and next up is a Ganju, Seat of the Empire. All of the channel cards are just really good, you know that, and this is no exception. A piece of removal or a land, depending on your situation, it would deal with a lot of creatures in the format. Also potentially killing a large creature as you go to block it after attacks as well. The strategy of Boros Convoke is to amass a huge board state and kill your opponents with creature damage. With 30 creatures in the main board and the ability with Gleeful Demolition and others to make loads of tokens, it can survive lots of board wides potentially, and it means you can build up your army again. Card draw coming from creatures too, like Warden of the Inner Sky, clue tokens for card draw as well from the great common card Novice Inspector, can really help you find the creatures you need for the deck. Also, as previously mentioned, the Knight Errant can help with this as well. All in all, Boros Convoke can be hard to deal with as it keeps coming at you from my experience playing against it, and with its fast starts the game can run away from you. A decent deck for the money indeed. Our next deck is Gruul Aggro, a deck with hasty creatures and combat tricks to make them bigger for some quick wins. Coming in at around £137, you'll get to save around £70 from the Boros Convoke deck, but you lose nothing in power and competitiveness. As before, let's look at the most expensive 3 cards in the deck. So, with no surprise, it's a land, Besiege Who Endures, at a whopping £32.50 each, and the deck is running a couple of these, which is over a third of the whole deck price. As I said, channel lands are very good, and this by far is the most expensive of all of them. With a legendary creature on the field for you, this costing potentially just 1 green mana to destroy an artifact or enchantment is extremely strong. And unfortunately, with this being played in Commander as well, this does keep the price pretty high. I'll not try and put you off building all these decks as is, but weigh up for you if you think it's needed and how much different power wise this will be made by replacing the Bozoju in the deck. Let me know in the comments what you think about replacing this in the deck. I'd love to know your thoughts. It really will be interesting to see if you think that the money expenditure for how good the card is to be in there and maybe not be replaced with an instant spell, then adding an extra land or something like that instead. Question Druid is a dual mode card that has adventure. For me, it's a mechanic I've always liked as it gives you options, which is what everyone likes in the deck. The adventure being instant is great to play at your opponent's end step, and then playing it as a creature that can get bigger with each red spell you play is, well, it's pretty neat to be honest. With 33 red spells in the deck, we don't really have to worry about the other colours that this gives counters to as well. Then we have Inti Seneschal of the Sun at around the same price as the Questing Druid. The static ability on this is powerful. Discarding a card to put a +1/1 counter on a creature, also giving it trample, is absolutely massive, especially on a big swinging Questing Druid like for example. The discard will also trigger its next ability of exiling the top card and letting you play it until end of turn. This card to me synergizes with the deck very, very well. Now, the strategy for Gruul Aggro is all about turning creatures sideways. It's attack, attack, attack. The deck has no main board removal as it's all in the sideboard, with cards like M Festivities, Lithomantic Barrage and Witchstalker Frenzy taking up the most of the sideboard. The deck relies on getting hasty creatures out early and making them big with like cheap pump spells that the deck runs, like Ancestral Anger, Monstrous Rage, and a cool little enchantment known as Audacity. Now, with the deck's low CMC, cost of each card, Godrich Cloaked Reveler can be an absolute beater as well. This is a card that I really do love. I do try and mix it into most red decks that I play personally. If you're getting 2 non-land permanents, enter the battlefield at the same turn, for it gives this flying, which is pretty easy in this sort of deck to be honest, and then it can be pumped away for some massive beats. Personally, like I said, I love this card. The deck runs fast and quick, and its small creatures can be made a lot bigger and compete with those meta mid-range deck beaters too. Our third deck today is Bant Toxic, just under the price of our previous deck, around £131, which is still super cheap and is another good choice for you to build in paper. Toxic decks rely on poison counters the majority of the time really to get those wins. Being that you only need to get half the amount of damage compared to normal is it's a huge plus for this deck. While the deck is pretty aggro, it also has a control element to it as well, which appeals to a lot of players who prefer this one really to just like straight up aggro. The deck this deck to me is the bane of my existence, and I never seem able to beat it. I don't know why. No matter what I play, I just get beat. It's just one of those decks. I think everyone has those types of decks they come across and just like always struggle. But hey, let's look at the deck's 3 most expensive cards for reference. Our first card is, yes, you guessed it, it's a channel land, and it's the blue one. It's Ottawara Soaring City. Let's get the name right. The blue channel land at around £16 can bounce back an artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker back to its owner's hand, which is also handy because we can target our own stuff too. Now, the deck only runs one of these, so if you have that spare one in your collection, now you've definitely found a use for it. The card is powerful, and like the other channel lands too, its cost can be reduced as well. I personally always try and look at these channel lands as extra spells, and I will use them only as lands myself if I really have to. The next expensive card in the deck is another land, but one that is really essential for the deck, I think, Mirrex. Still, a lot cheaper than our channel land. The deck runs 2 in the main and also runs 1 in the sideboard as well. We want to win by poison, and this land makes toxic mites that can help us get those counters up when doing damage. Now, they can't block, which is okay to be honest, but we can keep making them with spare mana, so it's always going to be a problem for our opponent to deal with. Then we have Skrelv Defector Mite, a perfect turn 1 play, so it's ready to protect our creatures like Venerated Rot Priest, and this is really, the Rot Priest is the linchpin of the deck. It's another creature that can't block, but yet again, it's not there as to do that duty. It's there to protect and make a creature unblockable against a certain colour. Of course, this is especially good against any mono-colour decks like mono red, mono white, anything like that. As mentioned before, the deck strategy is to win by poison counters. The deck runs just 16 creatures, as it also runs a control element to help keep the battlefield clear. Cards like Fading Hope can bounce opponents' creatures or protect ours in response to removal. March of the Swirling Mist can phase out our opponent's creatures too, so we can get through. It can also be used as a win con for final poison damage, which I've done before myself with the Venerated Rot Priest on the field by targeting our own and then it's dishing out more poison counters. Skrelv's Hive is a great enchantment for this deck, as also it briefly puts us on a clock with the life loss occasionally. Can be quite scary against mono red, but when we keep making toxic mites that eventually get the lifelink when our opponents have 3 or more poison counters, then the game starts to swing round. This is sometimes much needed against the super aggro mono red and Gruul decks. It really does become an important card for the deck. Protecting your Rot Priest is the key to this deck, as they can get you wins quick. A simple target or 2 can be enough sometimes to finish off your opponents. Working out which cards are in your hand is sometimes enough to target your own creatures and the deck's bounce spells to pile up the poison counters, and then you get their wins. It really is sometimes a matter of working your plays ahead of time, looking at the poison counters and then realising what you can do, and this deck can win just like that out of nowhere. It's a really cool deck. So now for the final 2 decks, and we are talking super cheap for competitive standard decks that get great results. First up is Mono Blue at just £63, and that's just under $80 for a mean, and I mean mean deck. A deck, if you play MTG Arena, which I'm sure a lot of you do, sometimes just auto quit when seeing those 2 islands played. Now, the most expensive card in the deck by far is the single copy of the blue channel land Ottawara. No surprise really to see it in the deck, other than that it's not a couple of them to me, but we don't mind really, as that's cheaper on the wallet, so if it can do well just with 1, then that's good. For me, if you're lucky enough to have a second copy though in your collection, I'd play 2, but it's in no way essential. The rest of the main board is super cheap, with no card being more than a few dollars in March of the Swirling Mist. The other main money cards are in the sideboard. First off is Fairy Mastermind, a flash flying rogue that punishes your opponent by letting us draw an extra card. So when they draw their second card of the turn, we get that extra card. We can also force this action too with the card's ability. Now, for me, it always feels strange for me to give opponents cards, but remembering that it helps us find answers too, it's pretty decent to be honest. Also knowing that we can counter a lot of their answers they've drawn with our mass of counter spells, it certainly eases the pain a bit. Now, against the right deck, I'm sure this card is great and comes straight into the main board. The third most expensive card in the deck is a single copy of Unlicensed Hurts, a really good artifact, a great card for attacking graveyard themed decks, so I can see why it's there, to be honest, especially with some of the new mechanics like Evidence. And of course also against the reanimated decks for sure. Plus it can turn into a beta, so all in all it's a really good card. So mono blue strategy is pretty simple. Counter what you need to, draw a ton of cards, and swing for big beats mainly with your haughty Djinn. Your aim is to control the board state a lot with mono blue and basically not let your opponents play Magic. This is kind of why the deck is hated to be played against so much, with Essence Scatter, Make Disappear, you've got Negate and Spell Pierce. I mean, the deck has a plethora of counter spells, and the deck has heaps of card draw too, with my favourite personally being Flow of Knowledge. Now, this is interacted with the amount of islands you have on the field, so with 21 islands in the deck, that card can really just be epic, unless they manage to sneak a Sheoldred onto the board, and then it becomes real rough, to be honest. Haughty Djinn is really the only win con for the deck, and to be honest, from my experience, it doesn't need much else. With all the spells in the deck, 30 in total in the main board, it can really, its power can be really big and cause some one swing wins sometimes. If you love your counter magic and you fancy playing something different to aggro, then this deck is definitely for you. So the last and final deck I have for you today is the cheapest of the lot at just £55. You've probably guessed it, but you're still here. If you're still here watching the video, just know I appreciate you a lot. So of course it's mono red, also known as Red Deck wins this one. A deck that can win super fast, faster than any deck today for me. That's not to say they always beat the other decks, as they're all competitive, but mono red is, well, it's mono red. All bar 2 of the creatures have haste, which shows the intentions of what the deck is really all about. It's a very aggressive deck with hasty creatures and of course the burn spells it runs too. So where's the money in this deck? Half the deck's money is in one of the creatures. That creature is Bloodthirsty Adversary. It's around £25 for the 3 of these. It runs and is, it is a really good card, but that is nearly half the money as well, which is quite surprising to me. It can be played turn 2 just to keep the pressure on, but also good late game where the extra cost can be played to play a spell from the graveyard for free. So with the diversity, it's a great card to be honest. Although pricey compared to the rest of the deck, this can win you games when it's late on as well, not just by getting down with some aggro early attacks. We then of course look at the one channel land it runs, which is Sokazan Crucible of Defiance. While still a lot cheaper than most of the other channel lands, it does a really good job for this deck to be honest. Creating 2 more hasty creatures is what this deck loves, synergizes in it well, just really well. As the deck is so cheap, I had to really check and scour for the 3rd most expensive card, and to my surprise it was Play With Fire. A nice card, but it certainly surprised me that these are around £2.30 each. So for me, I'm going to definitely have to be checking my bulk to see how many I have lying around. Maybe then go and sell them on Cardmarket, I think. It does 2 damage to any target. That's nice for 1 mana. And one of my favourite abilities it has is Scry. So potentially being able to do that as well if you're hitting the dome. It does a lot for 1 mana. So probably justifies the price a little bit. The deck strategy is simple, although not simple to play as some players do believe with red decks. It looks easy on the surface and it can be sometimes, slamming down creatures and keep swinging them as quick as you can. For me, to play the deck well, it's mastering the timing of the spells, whether the cards like Lightning Strike, Play With Fire are best off, smashing at the dome, or maybe removing creatures so the deck's own creatures can get through. Timing multiple permanents to come onto the battlefield and planning your moves ahead so that creatures like Godric can trigger and use its flying evasion to get through as well is another plan for the deck. Urabrask is a great addition to the deck as well, helps with also pressuring your opponent with a creature coming down every turn. I do love that card. It's one of my favourite red cards in standard at the moment for sure. Red Deck Wins is a deck I've played a lot, even as a blue mage like myself, and it can certainly get its fair share of wins, and for the price of the deck, it's certainly worth the money and time getting used to playing it. This meta deck is it's around every standard, so it can easily be upgraded each new set, which means you're getting a lot of longevity with this deck for sure. So there's the top 5 cheapest standard meta decks with a range of prices. I really hope they can appeal to the majority of you watching today. Let me know what you think of each deck and which ones you may build. Are you going to swap some of the cards like I suggested for more budget options? We're talking about those channel lands, so let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to support the channel, the best way is to like and subscribe to today's video, and maybe become a Patreon from the link in the description down below. Cheers for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.